Book of Joshua, chapter 5. And we're going to look at verse number 10 here because it's a very, very important verse of Scripture. We're not through with Joshua chapter 5, even though we hurriedly read some of the verses here. But there's some things that we can glean from these things that are important. So it says in verse 10, the children of Israel encamped in Gilgal and kept the Passover on the 14th day of the month at even in the plains of Jericho. Now, you'll recall that we read verses where they came up out of Jordan right over against Jericho. Jericho was not very far away, and they were going to have to take this city. It represented the strongest fortification, the mightiest army, per se, as far as trained and disciplined troops and the like in the whole land. Now, there were bigger soldiers in the sons of Anak, but these represented the crack troops of Canaan in Jericho. And so there they were. But before they did anything, they kept the Passover. Now, mind you, this is the third Passover they've kept in 40 years. The first Passover they kept was when they came out of Egypt. That was when they had liberty. And you remember this outline that Jimmy DeYoung gave on the three Passovers. The first Passover represented their liberty from the bondage of Egypt. So they came out. A year later, God had given them the law and they had built the tabernacle. And a year after that, they kept a second Passover. And then they marched from there to the Promised Land and rejected going into the Promised Land. So guess what? They didn't celebrate another Passover until they finally made it in with Joshua. And we are reading here in verse 10 that they kept the Passover on the 14th day of the first month, right in the land in front of Jericho. They did eat of the old corn of the land on the morrow after the Passover, unleavened cake, parched corn, in the selfsame day. Verse 12, the manna ceased on the morrow after they had eaten of the old corn. Now, this is a very, very important date. It's the 15th of the first month. And on the 15th day of their first month, Aviv, later post-exilic Nisan, was what feast? What feast began the day after Passover and lasted for 7 days? Feast of unleavened bread. You had first day after the Passover, and you celebrated it, and then you had the last day, Feast of Unleavened Bread. So here it was basically an 8-day celebration when you tacked on the Passover. So here we have the manna ceasing, and it is the 15th day of the first month. Now, I'm going to make a connection here. What was the Feast of Unleavened Bread all about? Going through their ovens, going through their pantries, going through their houses, and then it says all of their quarters, meaning every place they lived, and getting rid of what? Leaven. You cannot have a corrupting factor. Okay, now, they're right over against Jericho and about to enter the land. And the people of Jericho represent what? Leaven, a corrupting factor. And before they're going to get the land and their kingdom, all corrupting factors, starting with people, all unclean things, have to be cast out or killed or whatever. And so, here's the question. How long then did it take them to conquer Jericho? 7 days. And it coincides with the Feast of Unleavened Bread. For 6 days, they march around it once. On the 7th day, they march around it 7 times, and they took Jericho. It coincides with the Feast of Unleavened Bread. So what it's doing is just simply teaching them and us that before you can inherit the land, you have to get rid of that which is corruptible. And of course, with us, it starts with a body that is no longer corrupt, our resurrection body. And then we're rewarded accordingly to souls that are no longer corrupt. and on we could go. But we get rid of the demons, we get rid of the fallen angels, any corrupting factor before we get our inheritance. And that's what this is. And it coincides perfectly with the Feast of Unleavened Bread. So on that same day, verse 13, it came to pass when Joshua was by Jericho that he lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, there stood a man over against him with his sword drawn. Okay, now we're going to stop right here and just take a look at Joshua's posture. Now here is the man who is the leader of Israel, and he's about to face Jericho. Okay, now this is really one of the biggest tasks that is now placed on his shoulders as the leader. Before, if something failed, it's Moses' fault. Now, if it doesn't work, it's his fault. Now, where does he have his eyes? Down, you see. He is looking down, and you can just see him here contemplating, okay, now we're going to have to take this thing. How are we going to do it? And he's musing over the fact that he's got to take Jericho. But now, if you'll note, he lifts up his eyes, and that is the upward look. If we're going to get help taking Jericho, says Joshua, we've got to look up. God's got to provide the strategy, and he does. And it is one of the weirdest battle strategies that you ever want to think of. It is absolutely unique and unusual. So here stands this man over against him with his sword drawn in his hand, and he said, "Are you for us or for our adversaries?" Now here's an interesting thing as well. Then this is obviously a theophany. This is obviously Jesus Christ in the form of a man that's come down there, and his sword is drawn. But if you'll note, it says his sword is drawn. He looked, and there was a man over against him. This man's back, the Lord's back, was against Jericho, and his front, with the sword drawn, was facing Joshua. Now why? Simply because he's not going to allow Joshua to proceed until what? Joshua recognizes his lordship and seeks his face for the strategy. And sometimes we do that. We get to running ahead of the Lord. How are we going to do this? And we leave God out of the picture. And God, in effect, becomes our enemy. You're not going to pass this point. You're not taking Jericho. My name's at stake here. You're not going to proceed one step further until you seek my face. And that's exactly what's happening. The man is standing there with the sword drawn. It's the Lord Jesus Christ. And he's preventing Joshua from moving on. So are you for us or for our adversaries? No, I'm captain of the host of the Lord, and I'm now come. Joshua fell on his face to the earth and did worship, and said unto him, What saith my Lord unto his servant? All right? Recognition of lordship, recognition of authority, submission to what this man had. So, as captain of the Lord's host, he said to Joshua, Loose thy shoes from off thy foot, for the place wherein thou standest is holy. Now, let's think about this for just a little bit. Why does God, every time he approaches the leader of Israel here, the first two anyway, Moses was the first and Joshua was the second, why does God, whenever he comes down in a face-to-face with these guys, require them to take their shoes off? Well, there are several reasons here, and one, if you'll come back to book of Genesis, holding your place, we're going to go back to the original situation. And Genesis chapter 1 and verse number 26. God is calling an earthly people. And when God created man, he created him to be Lord over the earth. This is called the dominion mandate. And we have talked about this before. And it has to do with Operation Footstool. And so we have here in verse number 26, God saying, Let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish, the fowl, the cattle, over all the earth. So God created man in his image, and he blessed them. Verse number 28, And it says, be fruitful and multiply, replenish the earth, and subdue it, and have dominion over it. So it takes man back. It takes these leaders back to the original situation. I mean, Adam didn't have hush puppies on. Now, Adam didn't go to any shoe store and have the finest on his feet. He didn't have sandals on. He was made there, and in all of his glory stood there, and he and God were side by side and face to face in the holy ground situation. The reason you're created is to have dominion over the earth. Now, Satan defeated Adam, of course, but God is in the process of reconciling the earth and the heavens back to himself. So when Moses was taking out the earthly people, he had a face-to-face with God. And what did he have to do? Take his shoes off. When Joshua had a face-to-face, I'm calling now the earthly people into the land. Take your shoes off. And it takes us right back to the original Adamic situation where God gave the dominion mandate. And by the way, we can come back here to Joshua chapter 1, where it says in verse number 3, every place that the sole of your foot shall tread upon, that have I given you. This again is a link or a connection to that mandate where man is to rule the earth. And so these two tremendous leaders of God's earthly people, in getting their strategy, first of all, had to take their shoes off and get back to the nitty-gritty. Why God created man to begin with, and that is to have dominion over all the earth. And before Israel can have dominion over the world, they have to first conquer the land. And so therefore, their shoes had to come off. Now, there are a couple of the things to consider here as we're back in Joshua chapter 5. And that is, taking one's shoes off meant that there was nothing between God and man. That ground was holy because God was there, and you remove any obstacle between God and man. And that has to come first. If there's an obstacle there, or if there's something that gives man an advantage. Any soldier knows that to fight with your bare feet, unless, of course, you're Bruce Willis and Die Hard, to fight with your bare feet is not a good thing. But you're not there to fight with God or to threaten God in any way. And so therefore, you take away all human advantages in battle. You take your shoes off. But next, you remove any obstacle in between your fellowship with God. And so God and man are made one in this whole process. So there's a lot of spiritual truth there. That's the same thing for us. If we're going to conquer the heavenlies, what do we have to do between God and us? Remove the barriers, remove the obstacles. They have to go. We have to come back to that situation in a spiritual sense where our feet are on holy ground and we realize that we're conquering not earth but the heavenly places. And every place that the sole of our foot treads is going to be ours as well. But you got to take your shoes off first. And it's symbolic of humility and submission, being no threat to God, and being one with God himself. Okay, that brings us then to verse number 1 of chapter 6. And I like this. Now Jericho was straitly shut up because of the children of Israel. None went out, and none came in. Inaccessible to Israel because none came in. Every gate, every door was barred, locked, double locked, bolted. Every window was shut. The soldiers were on their posts looking over, ready for Israel to attack at any time. So, unless there's going to be a battle and divine intervention, Israel can't get in there. Just too strong of a city, too fortified and the like. But not only that, it was inescapable for those of Jericho. None went out. Had they gone out, what would happen? Well, Israel would get them and kill them. So you've got a stalemated situation here that is very beautiful for us in the angelic conflict. There is no, once Israel crossed over, once Canaan was given up by God, there was no peace pact. God said, don't sign a peace agreement. Don't make any covenant with them. It's too late. I've given them up. All except for Rahab and her family. Because he dealt with her heart and she responded. But no one else did. Therefore, they had to die. So you can't get in and they can't get out, and there's this stalemate situation. It's their land and they're going to try to keep you from possessing it. And in order for you to possess it, you've got to face them down and kill them and eliminate them from the land. Okay, this is the same thing in the angelic conflict. There's no such thing as détente. No such thing as a peace agreement with Lucifer and those fallen angels in the heavenlies. They want their thrones and their possessions, and they want to keep us from getting it. And unless we are bold enough and courageous enough to go in there and possess our possessions, we're never going to get them. So just like these people, we've got to go into the land as well and get the blessings God has given us. So here's the strategy. The Lord said to Joshua, see, I've given into thine hand Jericho, the king thereof, and the mighty men of valor. Now here's how you're going to do it. You're going to compass the city, all ye men of war, and go round the city once. Thus shalt thou do 6 days. And 7 priests shall bear before the ark 7 trumpets. On the 7th day ye shall compass the city 7 times, and the priests shall blow with the trumpets. And it shall come to pass that when they make a long blast with the ram's horn, and when ye hear the sound of the trumpet, all the people shall shout with a great shout. The wall of the city shall fall down flat, and the people shall ascend up, every man straight before him. Okay, now let's take you back again to 2 situations involving a 7-day period. We've already mentioned, of course, the Feast of Unleavened Bread. This particular entrance and battle, it coincides with the 7 days of that feast. Why? Because they've got to get rid of the corrupting factor. But there's another aspect of this. It takes us back to the recreation. What happened in 7 days? Well, God restored it, and he rested the 7th day, and the earth was restored. The earth was taken back, as it were, by God. The earth was given into the care of a man, Adam, at that point. Of course, he fell later on and lost it, but what we're showing you is that the earth was reclaimed by God. And he did it in 7 days. And he did it so that man can rule over the earth. Now, up until that particular point, they were floundering. He had a chosen earthly people, and now they're coming into the land, and their first battle is going to take how long? 7 days. And it's to reclaim the earth. And this is part of Christ's program of reconciling all things back to himself. And the recreation week shows us, and this 7-day period here shows us. Now, one more thing, and I like this. Verse 4. 7 priests shall bear the ark, before the ark, 7 trumpets, the 7th day, 7 times, and so forth. So you have 7 priests, 7 trumpets, 7 days, 7 times, and 7 blasts. 7 is the number of what? Perfection. But that's what we're doing here. We are going to completely reconcile the land back to God. But how many 7s do we have? Which is the number of grace. So it's perfection working with grace. It is God providing the means and man, by faith, following God's instruction and provision, accepting his provision to get what? The land. That's what it is. So grace, in effect, is providing the land, and God is going to do this in his perfect fashion. So let's read these things. On that day, then, verse number 6, we've got the first day of unleavened bread. Joshua, the son of Nun, called the priest and said, take up the ark of the covenant, and let the 7 priests bear the 7 trumpets of the ram's horns before the ark of the Lord. And he said to the people, pass on and compass the city, and let him that is armed pass before the ark of the Lord. And it came to pass, when Joshua had spoken unto the people, that the 7 priests bearing the 7 trumpets of ram's horns passed before the Lord, and blew the trumpets, and the ark of the covenant of the Lord followed them. The armed men went before the priests that blew the trumpets, and the reward came after the ark, the priests going on and blowing the trumpets. Now, let's all of this information here, let's just put it in perspective in 4 categories. On the one hand, in front were all the armed men. Okay, God always has his soldiers and his citizens. God always has his fighters and those that are the politicians and the average citizen and so forth. And so we're now having war where land has to be taken back, and it has to be done in a fight. So the armed men go before. So one category, the powers, earthly powers vested in people, is seen in this one category. But now, obviously, they're soldiers with swords and spears and so forth. The second category is the priests. Now, what do these 7 priests have but 7 ram's horns? What do the ram's horns represent? The heavenly powers of God. Well, how is that, Pastor? God is always spoken of as a circle God. Olam is the word. And when his power in relation to creation is seen, it is as though he had a ram's horn, and a ram's horn is twisted. And it is a virtual pipeline between the inside of himself and the outside of himself. So that when there was creation, was there a big bang at creation? Yes, there was. It was the blast, as it were, of a ram's horn, where God, who has the monopoly on all substance, said, let there be. And there was a transfer from himself through the ram's horn outside of himself, because there wasn't anything outside of himself. It's the ram's horn. And so the priest blowing this, you do realize that the ram's horn is just a pipeline. It is a circular pipeline. And what does it do? It takes the air which is inside of the priest, and it makes a noise on the outside of the priest. And so that's what they were doing. They were symbolizing the power of God in creation. God is about to reclaim his creation. And just as God, in effect, blew the ram's horn and let there be, and there was, that same power to create can be the power to destroy. And that's what they're about to do. Okay? So then the next group of people, we've got the powers, God-ordained earthly powers. We've got the heavenly powers demonstrated. The next group are the priests that carry the ark. What is the ark? The promises of God. The heavenly promises of God vested in the person of God and his integrity to the nation of Israel. And so here you have the priests toting the ark. The powers, the power of earthly powers, the heavenly powers, and the heavenly promises. So everything that Israel is to claim now in that land is dependent on if God is going to keep those promises or not. And then following up the rear, and I like this, it's called the reward, just means keeping up the rear. On the 4th category here are the common people. So you have 4 categories. The powers, earthly powers of God, the heavenly powers of God, the heavenly promises of God, and the earthly people of God, all neatly arranged in these 4 categories. And by the way, 4 is the number of the earth, 4 is the number of creation, and what is God about to do? He's about to reclaim his creation. He's going to take the land, and this is the first step. Israel out of the land cannot rule the world. The first step is Israel where? In the land. So all of these numbers, all of these things are symbolic of the program of God for Israel. Okay, now let's go on here. We are verse number 10. Joshua commanded the people, saying, now here's something neat. Ye shall not shout, nor make any noise with your voice, Neither shall any word proceed out of your mouth until the day I bid you shout. Then you'll shout. Now, mind you, and I just pick on the ladies because the ladies, of course, like to talk, but men like to talk too. But here was a demand for human silence. Perhaps during this week there might have been a few gaskets busted. Who knows? But because they couldn't talk. But there was a reason for this. In the time that Israel was marching around and blasting with the trumpets, it was symbolic of God's power alone. He was weakening the foundation. He was bringing about a separation, as it were, of the stones and the mortar and the joints that were holding that whole fortress together. And they're marching around there, and the power of God, the blast of the horn, is taking care of all of this. Man's power was not included. You can't talk. Don't make a sound with your voice. Just, excuse the phrase, just shut up. That's it. For 6 days, don't say a word. The only noise you're going to hear is from the animals, from your babies who don't know any better, and from those ram's horns. Because God is working on your behalf. And actually, there's a verse of scripture like that. If you just hold your place here and go to Psalms 46. Psalms 46. And we'll start with verse number 6. Because often the first thing we want to do when we get in a scrape is begin to tell God. Begin to give our opinion. Begin to open our mouths. Begin to intrude in areas that we should not. So, verse number 6. The heathen raged. The kingdoms were moved. He uttered his voice and the earth melted. There was no human addition here that helped him do that. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our refuge, and that's the whole point. If the city is going to be taken, it can't be taken by human means. There has to be divine intervention. There has to be a divine strategy, weird as it was. And mankind couldn't say a word. Just don't speak at all. I guess they had a crash course in sign language. I don't know what they did for the routine conversations, but Joshua said, you can't talk until I tell you to shout 7 days later. When I tell you to shout, then you can talk. So note what it says. Come behold the works of the Lord. What desolations he has made in the earth. And that's the whole point. They're going to learn that if they're going to take the land and stay in the land and defeat this whole thing, that they've got to depend upon him. He's going to lay it desolate for him. He maketh wars to cease unto the end of the earth. He breaks the bow, cuts the spear in sunder. He burns the chariot in fire. And now here we have this verse. It is not, and we use it as a devotion, and that's well and good. But it is not for this sweet little thing about you're by the waters and you hear the little trickle of the water and you hear the bird chirp and you're out in the meadows and so forth. Be still and know that I am God is nonsense. In the midst of all of this warfare, shut up. Be still. Why? Because I'm going to speak and I'm going to conquer your enemies. Be still and know that I am God. And that's the first thing that God told Joshua. And that Joshua related to the people. Be still. Just keep quiet. Don't intrude with a human voice. God's power symbolized in his voice, symbolized in those ram horns, good enough. And therefore, if you are still and know that I am God, I will be exalted among the heathen. I will be exalted in the earth. The Lord of hosts is with us. So let's come back to Joshua again. So here we are, verse number 11. Now we're going to read these and make comments as we go. So the ark of the Lord compassed the city going about at once. And they lodged in the camp, and they came into the camp and lodged in the camp. Joshua rose early in the morning, and the priests took up the ark. And the 7 priests bearing the 7 trumpets of ram's horns before the ark of the Lord went on continually, blew the trumpets. The armed men went before them. But the rear reward came after the ark of the Lord, the priests going on blowing the trumpets. And the second day they compassed the city once and returned to the camp. So they did 6 days. Now, this is quite a sight. Eisenhower and Churchill and those people planned on hitting Normandy Beach and the like, and it took them all of these days of amassing food and ammunition and getting the planes ready and the landing ships and so forth. And what does God tell them to do? Simply to march around this thing in this weird procession. First, you've got the powers, God's earthly powers and the soldiers. Next, you've got the heavenly power of God represented these priests. And they're marching around this whole city, probably about 10 acres. And the whole time they're marching around, they're blowing the horns. The next come these priests just tagging along with the ark, and then the whole rest of Israel's after them. And they're marching around this thing once each day. Now, I've often pictured myself as a soldier up on the walls of Jericho. What are these Israelis doing? Are they out of their mind? Hey, if this is all the best they can do, I'm not afraid of these guys. What is happening here? And they're marching around once they go back to camp, and that's all there is to it. For 6 days it's like this. And I imagine they're scratching their heads. What's going on? Till the 7th day. It came to pass, verse number 15, on the 7th day, that they rose early about the dawning of the day and compassed the city after the same manner. But this time they went around 7 times. And perhaps one soldier in Jericho put his money to the other soldier in Jericho. I'll bet you they're just going to go around 3 times today. 6, maybe 10 times, What are the odds? They're betting on the wall because they don't think anything's going to happen. And it came to pass at the 7th time, when the priest blew with the trumpets, Joshua said unto the people, Shout, for the Lord hath given you the city. Now, what is this? We have represented here what we call the divine human cooperative. Now, when you got saved, what did you do? Well, God did one part and you did the other part. It's divine human cooperative. And in the Christian way of life, God provides the power of the Holy Spirit and doctrine, but then you apply it to your life. It's a divine human cooperative. There are certain times when we do nothing and just be still and let God be God, as weird as we might think it to be. And then there's the time when God says, okay, will you please join me in this battle? So that when the ram's horns blew that 7th time, what did the people do? Joined in, shout. And the combination of the ram's horns and the shout of the people did what to the wall? All of it came tumbling down. All right? So, it says, and it came to pass at the 7th time, Joshua said, Shout, verse 16. Now, before we look at this, we're going to look at something else that he told them. This is real important. What's important is that God just didn't want to replace the people, the corrupt people of the land, with another corrupt people. I mean, what difference does it make if they're corrupt Canaanites or corrupt Jews? That's why John the Baptist and Jesus always hit these leaders, political or spiritual, because of their corruption. What's the difference? If you're both corrupt, you still don't glorify God, even though you're on the land. So God is not about just to replace one corrupt people with another. So here's what he says. The city shall be accursed. It is the Hebrew karim, and it's akin to the Arabic, when we all hear of these Muslims, especially in the basketball field. I guess they're in other sports now. But, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, what does it mean? Devoted or devoted to God. And it says, the city shall be accursed, meaning devoted to God. You can't own these things because God wants them for himself. Now, it's a test. If I'm going to put Israel in the land, Israel has to have higher standards of heart and life than the people I'm replacing, or else it's still no good. So he says to them with this test, the city is going to be accursed, even in and all therein, to the Lord. Only Rahab the harlot shall live, she and all that are with her in her house, because of what she did. And ye shall in any wise keep yourselves from the accursed thing, lest ye make yourselves accursed. So, if God has substance there, that's in Babylon, that's in Jericho, it has a Babylonian garment and some silver and so forth, that are devoted to him, don't take it. Don't even think about it. Follow me along, verse 18. When you take the accursed thing, you'll make the camp of Israel a curse and trouble it. Now, in just a couple of chapters, Israel's going to go after the city of Ai. Compared to Jericho, it is a minuscule city. You've got the molehill and the anthill type deal here. You've got your big mound and just a little mound with Ai. And guess what? Somebody's going to steal of the accursed thing here. His name is Achan, and we'll deal with that. But Israel could not proceed, and this little city whipped them in battle because God's presence wasn't with them. And he let this say, look, I'm not going to replace the people of the land with another corrupt people. That's all there is to it. So, all the silver, verse 19, gold, vessels, brass and iron, are consecrated to the Lord and come to his treasury. So it says in verse 20, the people shouted when the priest blew with the trumpets. Came to pass when the people heard the sound of the trumpet and the people shouted with a great shout, the wall fell down. So that the people went up to the city and every man straight before him, and they took the city. Now, this is a tremendous battle strategy. Why? Because there wasn't any escape for the inhabitants of Jericho. You've got a perfect circle cutting away. And again, it is a picture of cutting away of the old flesh, cutting away of the corruptible aspects. And so Israel surrounded the whole city, and when the walls fell flat, they just drew the loop, as it were. They just went straight before them, and anybody who was on the inside of the city could not escape. Except, you'll note here, let's read on. They utterly destroyed all the city. Men, women, young, old, ox, sheep, ass, with the edge of the sword. But Joshua said to the men that spied out the country, go to the harlot's house, and bring out thence the woman and all that she has. Now, here's the neat thing about this. Where was Rahab's house? Yeah. In fact, it says it's on the wall. Because remember, she let them out of a window of her house on the wall outside with that scarlet cord. So, the picture that is given here is that everything on the city of Jericho with regard to the wall fell down flat except for what? Rahab's house. It stood high and above over the judgment round about. And you'll remember when we first started this, we said that even though Rahab was a harlot, it is indicative of the fact that she really didn't want to be. She was just doing what a girl had to do, take care of her family here. But that she really had higher standards and wanted something better. And until something better came along, this is what she was going to have to do. And finally, when a better opportunity came along, she bought into it, and her house stood above the rest of the rubble there, showing that God protected her, recognized what was in her heart, and killed everybody else. Her house stood solid. She built her house upon a what? Rock. That's the illustration here. Okay, so let's read on. They burnt the city, verse number 24, with fire, and all that was therein. Only the silver, gold, and vessels of brass and iron they put into the treasury of the Lord. Rahab, the harlot, was saved alive. And note, she dwells in Israel unto this day, verse number 25, because she hid the messengers. Now, stay with me. We've got a few minutes. Hold your place here and go to Matthew chapter 1. Matthew chapter 1. Now, here is the most amazing thing. In the atonement of Jesus Christ, everything had to be factored in by way of curses. So that he, in effect, though he was purebred, and I had this question, and Debbie Harrington said, well, now, I want you to explain to me how Jesus Christ is purebred, and yet he has Rahab's genes in him, a cursed Canaanite. Well, the fact of the matter is that the cross takes care of curses. Cursed is everyone that hangs on a tree. And so, in order for God to take care of all curses, he had to include two peoples that were doubly cursed. One was the Canaanites, and the other was the Moabites. Now, how does he do that? Well, he doesn't go on the male side, he goes on the female side, because the male side is where the transmission occurs. He goes on the female side. And I want you to read it down here, verse number 4 of Matthew 1. And Aram begat Aminadab, and Aminadab begat Naasson, and Naasson begat Salmon, and Salmon begat Boaz of Rahab. Now, we know Rahab's husband. But not only that, we realize that Boaz came from Rahab. And now who was Boaz? And Boaz begat Obed of Ruth. And who was Ruth? The Moabitess. And Obed begat Jesse, and did Jesse conceive? None other than David. So you have these women inserted, directly. Hebrew, the Canaanite, Hebrew, the Moabite, and then Hebrew and David was then conceived. And the reason for that is you have the doubly cursed Canaanites and the doubly cursed Moabites. We'll deal how they were doubly cursed when we get into that subject. Factored into the cross, so that Jesus Christ died for them. That's how Rahab got saved. Jesus Christ, in effect, died for her double curse on the cross of Calvary. And it took adding her genes to his composite makeup in order for him to do that. And the same thing with Ruth. Okay, so let's come back and finish this up. So Joshua said, he adjured them at that time. Cursed be the man before the Lord that raises up and builds this city Jericho. He shall lay the foundation thereof in his firstborn, and his youngest son shall set up the gates of it. In other words, it's going to cost him his family. That's more or less if he raises it up. We do know that it was raised up because Jesus passed through Jericho, and there was a tax collector that was a little short on one end by way of height, and he climbed up into the tree. And who was that? Zacchaeus lived in Jericho, and Zacchaeus got saved. It is not saying that the city would never be rebuilt, but whoever did it was going to pay in spades with his family. So the city was rebuilt. Verse 27, the Lord was with Joshua, and his fame was noised throughout the country. Okay, our time is up. I don't know about you, but this kind of an exciting chapter when you realize just cursory reading of it, what's all this got to do with me? It's some fantastic things when you consider all the doctrines symbolized here, typified.